What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I never imagined that a routine family dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of Chicago would unravel into the kind of deeply personal humiliation that lingers in your mind long after the garlic-scented air has faded. But there I was at 42 years old, carefully dressed in a simple blouse I'd picked up from the local outlet mall during one of those weekend sales that promise affordability without sacrificing a bit of style, sitting amidst the familiar faces of aunts, uncles, and my parents who had gathered to celebrate my sister Emily's 40th birthday in a place called Emilio's Trattoria, where the white tablecloths gleamed under soft pendant lights and the waitstaff moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen every family dynamic unfold over countless meals. The evening had started on what felt like a positive note, with appetizers arriving promptly after we settled into our reserved corner booth, the bruschetta topped with fresh tomatoes and basil that carried the faint tang of summer even in the chill of late autumn, alongside those crispy calamari rings dipped in a marinara sauce that was rich enough to make you forget the price tag attached to every indulgence. And as conversation bubbled up around the table focusing on Emily's latest triumph in the competitive world of suburban real estate, where she had just closed a deal on a spacious four-bedroom colonial home complete with a white picket fence and all the trappings of the American dream that so many in our circle aspired to achieve, I found myself contributing politely when Mom turned her attention to me with that gentle inquiry about whether I had finally secured the promotion at my accounting firm that would elevate my steady but unremarkable career crunching numbers for mid-sized businesses in the north side of the city. Emily, ever the center of attention with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and those sparkling diamond earrings that caught the candlelight just so, interjected smoothly with her trademark fake sweet tone that she reserved for professional networking events and family gatherings alike, describing me as the practical one in the family, which elicited nods of agreement from the group as if it were the highest compliment imaginable, though deep down I recognized it for what it truly was: a subtle dig at my single life choices and the way I had carved out an existence in a modest apartment overlooking Ashland Avenue, far removed from the grandeur of her McMansion in a gated community off the interstate where every lawn was manicured to perfection and neighborhood associations enforced rules stricter than some office policies. The main courses arrived shortly thereafter, with my plate featuring a hearty portion of spaghetti carbonara that wrapped creamy sauce around al dente pasta in a comforting embrace, while Emily savored her filet mignon cooked to a precise medium rare with sides of roasted vegetables that added vibrant colors to the otherwise subdued table setting. And it was right in that moment of relative harmony, as forks clinked against china and wine glasses were refilled for yet another toast to Emily's bright future, that she leaned forward dramatically with her manicured finger extended directly toward me in a gesture that silenced the chatter around us before she delivered those cutting words, with a voice loud enough to draw glances from nearby diners who pretended not to eavesdrop on what was clearly becoming an uncomfortable scene. "Rachel, go," she announced pointedly while the words echoed slightly off the exposed brick walls of the restaurant, adding, "This table isn't for adopted kids," which hung in the air like an unwelcome fog, causing an eruption of laughter from Uncle Mike's booming guffaw that shook his broad shoulders to Aunt Linda's more restrained titter behind her napkin, and even Dad's awkward chuckle that he attempted to mask by taking a hasty sip of his Chianti, as if the vintage could wash away the awkwardness settling over the group. My cheeks flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the dining room and everything to do with the raw sting of being reduced to my adoption status in front of people who had known me for over 2 decades, since Mom and Dad had welcomed me into their home at the age of 22, following my turbulent early adulthood, marked by a college dropout phase and a search for stability that they generously provided, without ever making me feel like anything less than family, until moments like this eroded that foundation. Rather than dissolving into tears or making a dramatic exit that would only fuel their narrative of me as the overly sensitive outsider, I chose instead to maintain my composure by setting my fork down deliberately beside my half-eaten pasta and offering a tight-lipped smile that I had perfected during countless tense client meetings at the firm, where emotions often ran high over disputed figures and overdue payments, allowing the conversation to meander Onward with more superficial toasts to Emily's accomplishments and vague suggestions directed at me about finding someone nice to settle down with, as if my independence were a temporary condition rather than a deliberate choice shaped by years of navigating family dynamics that always positioned her as the favored biological daughter. The meal progressed in fits and starts, with dessert menus being passed around and orders placed for tiramisu that arrived dusted with powdered sugar and accompanied by espresso shots strong enough to jolt anyone back to alertness. But the undercurrent of tension persisted until the waiter named Marco, a middle-aged man with a thick Italian accent and observant eyes that seemed to catalog every nuance of interaction at his tables, approached with the leather-bound folder containing the bill, which he placed squarely in front of Emily, totaling $320 for the collective extravagance of shared platters, multiple courses, and those extra glasses of wine that had loosened tongues just enough to let truth slip. Emily's confident expression faltered momentarily as she slid the folder toward Dad in the habitual family ritual where someone else inevitably covered the cost without a second thought. But he was distracted by a notification on his phone, pulling him into a quick exchange about work, leaving the table in an expectant hush that amplified the subtle shift in power dynamics around the once jovial group. Without a word, I reached into my purse, the one with the slightly frayed strap from years of practical use, carrying everything from work ledgers to emergency snacks, and extracted my credit card, sliding it across the crisp linen tablecloth toward Marco, who accepted it with a nod of quiet approval before processing the payment at the terminal near the host stand. Upon his return with the receipt, I signed it with a deliberate flourish, adding a tip that was generous enough to reflect my satisfaction in this small act of subversion, turning what could have been a lingering resentment into a moment of unexpected control that left Emily's eyes widening in a blend of surprise and reluctant acknowledgement, as the laughter from her earlier comment now felt distant and hollow in the retrospective glow of the evening's close. Gathering my belongings with purposeful movements, I rose from the table, offering a general goodnight to the assembled relatives who murmured responses tinged with unease, and made my way toward the heavy wooden door of the restaurant, where the cool autumn breeze from the Chicago streets beckoned, promising relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. But just as my hand touched the brass handle and freedom seemed within reach, Marco's voice called out from behind me, carrying across the entryway with professional courtesy yet undeniable urgency. "Ma'am, one moment please," he said, extending a small envelope sealed with the restaurant's distinctive wax stamp and bearing my name in elegant handwriting that I did not immediately recognize as I turned back toward him, feeling a sudden flutter of intrigue mixed with apprehension while noticing from the corner of my eye that Emily at the table had gone noticeably pale, her composure cracking just enough to hint at secrets lurking beneath the surface of our fractured family bonds, waiting to be uncovered in ways that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my place within it. That mysterious envelope felt like a lead weight pressing against the side of my purse during the entire drive back to my apartment on the north side of Chicago, where the city streets buzzed with late-night traffic and the occasional honk from impatient drivers. Navigating the familiar grid of one-way avenues that always seemed to test my patience after an evening as emotionally draining as the one I had just endured at Emilio's Trattoria, with its lingering sense of garlic and regret clinging to my clothes like an unwanted reminder of family dysfunction. I maneuvered my reliable old sedan into the parking spot beneath the flickering street lamp outside my brick building, the kind of modest structure built in the 1970s with creaky stairs and neighbors who kept to themselves, preferring the anonymity of urban living over the nosy interactions that defined Emily's suburban enclave. And once inside my second-floor unit, I immediately kicked off the heels that had started to pinch. After hours of forced smiles and tense posturing, finally allowing my feet to breathe on the worn hardwood floors scattered with the remnants of my solitary lifestyle, including a stack of unread mail on the entry table and a half-eaten frozen pizza box from the night before that spoke volumes about the uncomplicated routine I had cultivated since deciding independence was preferable to the conditional acceptance offered by my adoptive family. Pouring myself a generous glass of inexpensive Merlot from the bottle I kept in the fridge door for just such occasions, I settled at the small kitchen table under the harsh glow of the overhead light that cast long shadows across the linoleum, and after a few Fortifying sips that warmed my chest and dulled the sharp edges of humiliation, I finally addressed the envelope, turning it over in my hands, noting the elegant script of my name, Rachel Thompson, as if the sender had taken care to make it personal, and with a deep breath I tore open the sealed flap, allowing a single faded Polaroid photograph to slide out onto the table surface, revealing an image of a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to me, with the same dark wavy hair framing a face marked by sharp cheekbones and a determined jawline cradling a newborn baby in what appeared to be a hospital room straight out of the 1980s, complete with pastel blue walls, a tangle of monitoring wires, and a window overlooking a generic Midwest parking lot that could have been anywhere from our hometown in Oak Park to a facility in the city itself. Flipping the photo over, I discovered a handwritten note in the same precise handwriting that sent a chill racing down my spine, as it read simply, "Rachel, she's not who you think, ask Emily," implying that my sister, the one who had orchestrated my public shaming just hours earlier, held some key piece of information about my adoption story. The version Mom and Dad had always presented as straightforward and unremarkable, involving a distant relative's untimely loss and their decision to step in as loving parents when I was 22 years old, fresh out of a failed attempt at community college and desperate for stability, without the complications of biological ties that might complicate their picture-perfect nuclear family. The implication twisted in my gut, not just from the wine but from the realization that Emily's cruel outburst at the restaurant might have been more than sibling rivalry fueled by her perpetual need to assert dominance as the biological favorite, but perhaps a deliberate deflection from truths she had been guarding for years, perhaps out of jealousy or loyalty to our parents, who had built their lives around maintaining appearances in a community where whispers about adoptions could still carry the weight of old prejudices, especially among the older generation that remembered when such arrangements were handled quietly to avoid scandal. Sleep evaded me that night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan rotating lazily above me, replaying the evening's events, from the laughter that had stung like salt in a fresh cut to the satisfaction of paying that $320 bill, which had at least given me a momentary upper hand, turning Emily's attempt at exclusion into my quiet assertion of self-sufficiency. And by the time morning light filtered through the thin curtains, I had formulated a plan born of equal parts curiosity and the simmering desire for payback, the kind that would be clever and personal, drawing on shared history rather than outright confrontation that might push her further into defensiveness. Determined to confront her on my terms, I drove out to Emily's gated community 20 minutes southwest of the city, where the houses loomed large with their 3-car garages and professionally landscaped yards designed to impress potential homebuyers in her cutthroat real estate market, arriving unannounced on a Saturday morning when she would likely be recovering from whatever social obligation had filled her calendar the night before. And sure enough, she opened the door in her designer yoga pants and a fitted tank top, her blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail that did little to hide the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, as she greeted me with a raised eyebrow and that trademark smirk suggesting she assumed I had come crawling back to smooth over the dinner fiasco. Stepping inside without waiting for an explicit invitation, I took in the opulent living room with its cream-colored sofas arranged around a stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a backyard pool shimmering under the autumn sun, a stark contrast to my own cozy but cluttered space. And once we were seated with mugs of her fancy fair trade coffee steaming between us, I pulled the Polaroid from my purse, laying it face up on the glass coffee table, watching as her expression shifted from casual indifference to outright alarm, her hand darting out to snatch it up as if it were a hot coal, her fingers trembling slightly in a way that betrayed the composure she worked so hard to project in boardrooms and open houses alike. Pressing the advantage, I recounted the restaurant scene, not with anger, but with a measured recounting that highlighted her pointed finger and the ensuing laughter, while emphasizing how my payment of the bill had been a deliberate choice to underscore my independence, refusing to let her words define my worth. And when she tried to brush off the photo as some harmless relic from Aunt Linda's attic, possibly misplaced during a recent family purge, I countered with a witty reminder of our shared childhood, pulling from the vault of memories that only siblings could access, like the time in high school when she had convinced me to cover for her late-night escapade with a boy from the debate team, resulting in me taking the blame for sneaking out And facing Mom's wrath alone, a story I had kept buried until now, framing it not as blackmail, but as a gentle nudge toward reciprocity in the spirit of family honesty. Emily's defensiveness escalated as she crossed her arms over her chest, admitting grudgingly that the photo had come from an old family album she had stumbled upon while helping Dad organize the garage last spring, but her voice cracked when she insisted she had no knowledge of any mysterious she in the note, claiming it must be a misunderstanding or perhaps a prank from one of our more mischievous cousins who enjoyed stirring the pot at gatherings, and yet the way her eyes avoided mine and her fingers toyed with the hem of her tank top suggested deeper resentment bubbling beneath the surface, perhaps tied to the privileges she had always enjoyed as the blood daughter, while I navigated the subtle undercurrents of being the adopted addition, a dynamic that had fostered her subtle superiorities over the years, from claiming the larger bedroom to receiving the lion's share of parental encouragement in her career pursuits. We parted on uneasy terms, with her promising to dig deeper into the photo's origins and me leaving with a forced hug that felt as insincere as her assurances, but as I reversed out of her driveway, my phone vibrated insistently in the cup holder, displaying a call from Mom whose timing seemed too coincidental to ignore, and when I answered, her voice carried that familiar blend of concern and hesitation as she said, "Rachel, honey, Emily stopped by earlier looking upset and mentioned something about an old photo. I think it's time we discussed your adoption papers in more detail." What on earth has she gotten herself into this time that would prompt such a revelation after all these years of letting the past lie dormant? Mom's call lingered in my mind like an unfinished ledger entry that demanded reconciliation as I navigated the bustling Chicago streets back toward my apartment, where the afternoon sun slanted through high-rise shadows, casting elongated patterns on the pavement and prompting me to delay any immediate response until I could process the implications of Emily's sudden candor during our confrontation in her overly pristine living room that had left me with more questions than the vague assurances she provided about the Polaroid's origins and the cryptic note urging me to seek answers from her, specifically as if she held the master key to a family vault I had only begun to suspect existed beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary dynamics. By the time evening rolled around, with the city humming its usual symphony of distant sirens and pedestrian chatter filtering up from the sidewalk below my unit, I decided against calling Mom right away, instead opting to let the unease simmer overnight. While I distracted myself with a marathon of old sitcom reruns on my laptop, the kind featuring flawed families that always resolved their squabbles with heartfelt talks and canned laughter, which felt ironically distant from the raw tensions playing out in my own life, where resolution seemed as elusive as a balanced budget during tax season at the firm. Sleep came fitfully interrupted by dreams blending the restaurant's white tablecloths with faded hospital rooms and Emily's pointing finger morphing into accusatory shadows that chased me through corridors lined with yellow documents until morning light finally pierced the curtains, pulling me back to reality with a resolve to address Mom's invitation directly, since ignoring it would only allow the mystery to fester like an unchecked expense report, leading to bigger discrepancies down the line. I reached out to her later that Sunday, dialing the familiar number that connected to the Oak Park bungalow where I had spent my formative years after joining the family at 22, a transitional age that blurred the lines between young adult independence and the security of parental guidance. And when she answered, her voice carried that inherent warmth laced with underlying worry, the tone she had perfected over decades of mediating between Emily's bold assertions and my quieter navigations of the household hierarchy, suggesting we meet at the house that evening once Dad headed out to his weekly lodge meeting, where he could escape into card games and tall tales among fellow retirees who shared his aversion to delving into emotional undercurrents. Arriving as the sun dipped low, painting the neighborhood in hues of amber and crimson, I was greeted by the comforting aroma of chamomile tea brewing in the kitchen, the same ritual Mom invoked for any conversation requiring delicacy, much like the one she had held with me during my early days in the home, explaining away differences in appearance or holiday traditions with gentle reassurances that emphasized chosen family over biological ties. And as we settled at the scarred oak table surrounded by the accumulated detritus of family life, from framed photos of Emily's wedding to dusty knickknacks from Dad's fishing expeditions, she retrieved a weathered shoebox from the depths of the pantry, its contents spilling forth in a cascade of Faded albums, clipped newspaper articles, and envelopes sealed with aging tape that hinted at stories long consigned to the attic of memory. Together we sifted through the layers, starting with baby pictures of Emily in frilly dresses juxtaposed against my own snapshots from shortly after adoption, showing a young woman with wide eyes and tentative smiles at backyard barbecues, and as Mom narrated the timeline, her hands occasionally pausing on certain images, like one of a group at a company picnic, where the woman from the Polaroid stood prominently, her arm around a younger version of Dad, suggesting connections I had never considered. She admitted the adoption had involved private arrangements to circumvent public scrutiny in their conservative community, where single motherhood carried stigmas that could tarnish reputations built on church involvement and neighborhood respectability. Yet her gaze flickered evasively when I probed deeper into the baby's origins, or why Emily seemed privy to details that had eluded me for so long, revealing cracks in the narrative that positioned me as the grateful outsider rather than a full participant in the family's intertwined history. The discoveries fueled a growing conflict within me, not just the external puzzle of hidden truths, but an internal tug-of-war between the desire for belonging and the temptation to wield the information as leverage in ways that skirted the boundaries of fairness, especially as the week progressed and Emily's neighborhood block party loomed on the calendar, an annual event she hosted to cultivate real estate leads among the suburban crowd of families grilling burgers and chasing kids across manicured lawns under strings of festive lights that transformed cul-de-sacs into temporary carnivals. I chose to attend not out of reconciliation, but with a calculated intent to execute a subtle revenge, one that would expose a sliver of her carefully curated perfection without descending into outright sabotage. Arriving fashionably late with a covered dish of my signature potato salad, dressed in casual jeans and a blouse that blended seamlessly into the crowd of neighbors and potential clients who mingled over plastic cups of lemonade and plates piled high with hot dogs slathered in condiments. Mingling strategically near a cluster of Emily's professional acquaintances, including a sharp-eyed mortgage broker and a chatty interior designer, I steered the conversation toward nostalgic family anecdotes, framing Emily's college escapades as endearing youthful follies, particularly the infamous spring break trip to Cancun, where she had maxed out Dad's credit card on impulse purchases and party excesses, only to hush it up with promises of repayment that never fully materialized, presenting it as a lighthearted tale of sisterly solidarity and covering for each other, which elicited chuckles and knowing nods from the group, while Emily, who had been circulating nearby, froze mid-sentence, her face tightening into a mask of controlled irritation as she approached under the guise of refilling drinks to pull me aside near the fence line where the fireworks display was about to commence. Her confrontation came swift and low-voiced amid the anticipatory murmurs of the gathering. You think dredging up ancient history like that makes you clever, Rachel? It just makes you bitter, as if your little digs could touch the life I've built, while she gestured vaguely at the idyllic scene of laughing children and networking adults, but beneath the defensiveness lurked a vulnerability that humanized her for a fleeting moment, her eyes betraying the fear of her flawless facade cracking under the weight of accumulated resentments that had simmered since childhood, when I had quietly absorbed the roles she shunned, from helping with chores to listening to Mom's confidences without complaint. Our exchange escalated into hushed accusations, with me defending my actions as mere reciprocity for her restaurant cruelty and her countering that the photo was an innocent artifact from a box of forgotten items with no bearing on present realities, until the first fireworks burst overhead, scattering sparks that mirrored the tension between us, prompting her to storm back to her hosting duties, leaving me with a hollow sense of triumph tainted by the realization that my growing vindictiveness might be eroding the very connections I sought to reclaim, even as doubts about my choices nagged at the edges of satisfaction, wondering if friends like Lisa would view this as empowerment or escalation. Later that night, back in my apartment, sorting through photocopies of the shoebox contents under the dim lamplight, I discovered a concealed letter slipped into the lining of one album envelope, its creased paper addressed to Emily in a handwriting that matched the Polaroid's note, reading, "Keep the truth about Rachel's mother quiet, it's for the family's good," which sent my pulse racing with implications of deliberate omissions far beyond what Mom had shared. But before I could fully absorb the words, my phone illuminated the darkened room with an incoming voicemail from an unknown number. It's blinking Notification promising revelations that could either illuminate the shadows or plunge everything into deeper ambiguity. The voicemail notification glowed insistently on my phone screen like a beacon in the dim confines of my apartment where the late-night quiet amplified every creak from the building's aging structure and the distant rumble of a passing train that reminded me of the relentless forward motion of life, even as my world teetered on the edge of revelations that could upend the fragile equilibrium I had maintained for years since integrating into the Thompson family with its blend of genuine affection and unspoken hierarchies that positioned Emily as the unchallenged star. Hesitating only briefly under the pull of curiosity laced with caution, I pressed play, allowing the gravelly voice of an older man filtered through what sounded like a poor connection, perhaps from a flip phone or a landline in some remote location, to fill the room with his measured words. "Rachel, if you're asking questions about that photo, meet me at the diner on Route 66 tomorrow at noon. Come alone. No name provided." Just an urgent tone that suggested familiarity with the shadows of my past and enough discretion to avoid direct identification, which stirred a cocktail of apprehension and intrigue, making me wonder if this was a genuine lead or some elaborate hoax orchestrated by Emily to regain control after our tense exchange at the block party, where my subtle airing of her Cancun escapade had left her seething amid the fireworks and forced smiles. Sleep proved elusive that night as I tossed amid tangled sheets, replaying the letter's directive to keep quiet about my mother's truth and envisioning scenarios ranging from a long-lost relative offering closure to a confrontation that might expose deceptions woven into the fabric of my adoption story, the one mom had painted as a benevolent act of charity, without the messy undercurrents of family scandals that could explain Emily's pointed cruelty at the restaurant as more than mere sibling rivalry, but a desperate bid to maintain her pedestal in our parents' eyes. By morning, the resolve to pursue answers overrode any lingering doubts, so I called in sick to the firm, citing a migraine that wasn't entirely fabricated given the pounding in my temples from the accumulated stress, and set out early for the drive along the historic highway, where billboards for motels and diners evoked a sense of Americana nostalgia mixed with the grit of roadside realities. Arriving at the chrome-trimmed establishment with its checkered floors and pie display cases just before noon to claim a booth in the back, where vinyl seats stuck slightly to my jeans in the humid air conditioned by ancient units humming overhead. The man who slid in opposite me shortly after carried the weathered look of someone in his 70s, with salt and pepper hair thinning at the crown and flannel shirt sleeves rolled up over forearms, marked by sunspots from years perhaps in construction or outdoor labor, introducing himself as Uncle Ray, a name that tugged at vague recollections from childhood. Mentions of Dad's estranged brother, who had relocated to Arizona following a bitter divorce that severed ties with the Illinois branch of the family, and as he stirred sugar into his black coffee with deliberate motions, he confirmed the Polaroid originated from his late mother's collection, depicting my biological grandmother in a hospital shortly after my birth, spinning a narrative of familial discord where my birth mother, his sister Lena, had faced immense pressure as a young unmarried woman in the conservative confines of their small-town community, leading to a hushed adoption arranged through private channels to preserve reputations tied to church circles and local businesses. The twist he revealed deepened the dilemma, suggesting that our parents had known Lena personally, having facilitated the placement to keep the arrangement within the extended bloodline, framing me not as a stranger, but as a concealed relative groomed to forget origins in favor of a simplified family structure, which explained the intimate details in the documents from Mom's shoebox, but raised ethical quandaries about consent and transparency that made me question the very foundation of my gratitude toward them, while Ray handed over a business card for a genealogist in the city, warning that Emily might resist any further probing to safeguard the status quo. He had built his life away from, leaving me with a sense of isolation amplified by the diner's lunchtime chatter from truckers swapping stories at the counter. Returning to the city with my mind a whirlwind of fragmented histories, I channeled the turmoil into a form of revenge that felt intellectually satisfying, if morally ambiguous, deciding that Emily's online persona as the epitome of suburban success deserved a gentle puncture. So that evening, from my couch surrounded by the comforting clutter of takeout containers and my laptop's blue glow, I composed an anonymous post on a popular local real estate forum, posing as a concerned community member who had witnessed her handling of family matters at a recent gathering and weaving in the Cancun credit card incident as a cautionary tale of past financial indiscretions that belied her polished pitches without veering into outright falsehoods, just enough innuendo to spark discussions among potential clients who valued integrity in their home buying advisors. Watching the post gain traction with comments piling up by the hour, including queries from brokers about verifying her track record brought a wry smile to my face, the kind of clever payback that echoed the bill-paying moment at the restaurant. But as notifications continued into the night, a twinge of unease settled in recognizing that this digital sabotage could backfire, costing her deals and reputation in ways that mirrored her emotional jabs at me, prompting reflections on whether I was reclaiming power or descending into the pettiness she embodied. Emily's furious call came the following afternoon during my extended lunch break, her voice crackling through the speakerphone with accusations that pierced the office hum. "You think that forum crap is smart, Rachel? It's tanking my leads and making me look like a flake," forcing me to defend myself over the phone with feigned ignorance, while she retaliated by texting a screenshot of an ancient email from years back, where I had vented frustrations about feeling like the perpetual outsider in family photos and decisions, twisting it to portray me as chronically ungrateful, which stung with its selective editing, but also highlighted the mutual arsenal of vulnerabilities we wielded like reluctant weapons in this escalating feud. The dilemma intensified as I weighed confiding the letter's contents to Mom, which could fracture alliances irreparably, or holding back to let the revelations unfold organically, though my conversation with best friend Lisa over hurried drinks that evening, where she shook her head and advised against further escalation, only amplified the internal conflict, making me ponder if my choices were empowering assertions or self-sabotaging spirals that alienated potential support networks. By the week's end, an anonymous email arrived in my inbox from a nondescript address bearing the subject line, "Your bio mom isn't gone, she's closer than you think. Check the restaurant again. Ask for Marco's private note," which reignited the chain of mysteries linking back to that fateful dinner. And as I stared at the screen contemplating a return visit, a sharp knock echoed through my apartment door, revealing Emily on the threshold, uninvited, her eyes red-rimmed and clutching the original hidden letter like a reluctant olive branch, her presence signaling a potential turning point that could either bridge our divides or widen them into an unbridgeable chasm. Emily's unanticipated appearance on my doorstep that drizzly Thursday evening transformed the quiet sanctuary of my apartment into a stage for raw confrontation, as rain pattered against the windows like impatient fingers drumming out the rhythm of unresolved tensions. And she stood there soaked to the bone, her usually impeccable blonde hair plastered to her forehead, and the original hidden letter from the shoebox gripped in her hand, as if it were both a shield and a surrender, her red-rimmed eyes reflecting a vulnerability that clashed with the poised real estate queen who had humiliated me at the restaurant just weeks earlier, forcing me to step aside and invite her in despite the surge of wariness that made me question whether this was genuine remorse or another calculated move to manipulate the narrative before I could leverage Uncle Ray's revelations or the anonymous email urging a return to Emilio's for Marco's private note. We migrated to the couch in my living room, where the thrift store cushions sagged under our weight, and I offered her a mug of instant coffee that steamed faintly in the lamplight, its bitterness mirroring the undercurrent of our conversation, as she finally broke the silence, admitting with a voice thick from unshed tears that her outburst at the birthday dinner had stemmed not just from petty jealousy over my perceived stability, but from a deeper fear ignited by discovering a modest inheritance left to me by our Aunt Lena, who turned out to be my biological mother, Dad's estranged sister, who had endured a tumultuous marriage and subsequent flight from the family fold, leading to a clandestine adoption arranged by our parents to quietly integrate me into their household while preserving the facade of a uncomplicated family unit free from the scandals that could ripple through their church-affiliated social circles. The confession unfolded in halting details, painting Lena as a woman of quiet resilience who had placed me with them at 22 years old after years of unstable circumstances, ensuring I received the education and opportunities she couldn't provide herself, but whose final letter 2 years before her passing from a prolonged illness had specified a trust fund of $50,000. earmarked specifically for my future, as some Emily had uncovered while rifling through Dad's papers in the wake of his recent health scare, and which she had withheld out of irrational worry that claiming it would shift family loyalties, tipping the scales away from her as the biological heir apparent in a dynamic already fraught with subtle competitions over parental approval and material successes. The weight of her admission hung between us heavy as the humid air seeping in from the storm outside, prompting me to absorb the layers of betrayal, not only in her silence, but in the collective omissions that had defined my role as the adopted daughter forever. On the periphery, and yet amid the hurt, a wry humor bubbled up as I remarked that if tables weren't for adopted kids, perhaps trust funds should come with membership cards, to a light jab that elicited a watery chuckle from her and diffused the tension just enough to allow me to share Uncle Ray's diner meeting, where he had confirmed Lena's story and provided the genealogist's card, though I held back on the forum post's fallout, sensing that full disclosure might shatter the tentative bridge she was extending with this olive branch of truth. Energized by the partial closure, I resolved to follow the anonymous tip the next morning, driving back to Emilio's trattoria under clearing skies that promised renewal if not full absolution. Where Marco greeted me with a knowing nod behind the polished bar and discreetly passed over a sealed envelope marked private, containing Lena's handwritten apology for the secrecy imposed by circumstances beyond her control, along with bank details for the trust that I transferred to my account via my phone in the restaurant's quiet corner, feeling a surge of empowerment mingled with the bittersweet ache of lost time, while learning that Marco was a distant cousin on Lena's side, alerted by Ray to time the delivery precisely after Emily's dinner, slight as a catalyst to unearth the buried truths without further delay. With the financial security now tangible enough to fund a down payment or a career pivot, I orchestrated the ultimate reckoning by inviting the entire family to a neutral lakeside picnic in a Chicago park, the kind of open-air gathering with checkered blankets, sandwiches from a local deli, and the gentle lap of Lake Michigan waves that evoked simpler family outings from my childhood. Before the undercurrents had grown so turbulent, arriving early to spread out the spread and compose myself amid the breezy expanse that allowed for honest exchanges without the claustrophobia of dining rooms. As relatives trickled in, Mom with her thermos of iced tea, Dad fiddling with a portable grill, and aunts, uncles, including a subdued Emily, who arrived last with downcast eyes, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation until I gathered them in a loose circle, recounting the chain of events from the restaurant humiliation and bill payment that had asserted my independence to the Polaroids mystery, the block party anecdote that had chipped at Emily's armor, and the forum post's anonymous sting that had prompted her confession, framing it all not as unbridled vengeance, but as a necessary unraveling of deceptions that had stifled my full belonging, while acknowledging the moral gray areas in my retaliations, like using personal history as leverage, which might strike some as crossing lines into pettiness, even as it felt like reclaiming stolen agency. The group's silence broke with Mom's tearful apologies for the omissions, justified in her mind as protective measures against a judgmental world, and Dad's gruff admission that they had always seen me as their own, but feared complicating things with biological overlaps, leading to a collective exhale as I produced a printout of the trust statement, handing it to Emily with a pointed yet playful remark: "This table's big enough for all of us now, or at least the bill is," echoing that $320 night that ignited the fire and drawing tentative laughter that softened the edges of long-held resentments into something resembling reconciliation. Yet, as the picnic wound down with shared stories and tentative hugs, Emily pulled me aside near the water's edge, whispering that Lena's letter alluded to unresolved threads like possible half-siblings from her earlier life or lingering estate claims that could drag the family into legal entanglements, testing this newfound fragile peace and leaving me to drive home alone with the sun setting over the lake, the funds a quiet victory in my account, but the mind swirling with ambiguities about whether this revenge had truly healed the fractures or merely highlighted deeper fissures in bonds forged from half-truths, prompting reflections on if cutting ties entirely might offer more freedom than this tentative mending, and what other secrets might surface to challenge the narrative we had painstakingly rewritten under the weight of one fateful dinner.